The Legend of Zelda is without a doubt one of the most iconic series of video games, and my personal favorite series. Over the years, the series has had its fair share of villains. Some of them one-off, some we wish would return, and some that just won't stay down. But recently, one of the oldest foes in Zelda has been reincarnated. One that we thought had been defeated permanently a long time ago. The Timeline. Going back as far as 1991 and the release of Link to the Past, much of the Zelda community had devoted itself to unraveling the true history of Hyrule. See, there's a clear link between Zelda 1 and Zelda 2, The Adventures of Link, being that it's the same Link that just goes on a new quest. Then came out Link to the Past, which most people agreed was a prequel somehow showing the fall of Hyrule, and then Ocarina of Time showed us the imprisoning war that was alluded to in Link to the Past. So in 2001, Nintendo of America went rogue and released their version of the events, which is as follows. Ocarina of Time leads to Majora's Mask, leads to Link to the Past, leads to Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, leads to the original Legend of Zelda, which finally leads to Link's Awakening. But, and this is the key, they also specified that every game so far had the same version of Link and there were no reincarnations or retellings of the same story. To explain the massive gaps in time, they also explained that Termina processed time differently, and that when Link returned after Majora's Mask, hundreds of years had passed. Now, obviously that causes way more issues than it answers, but it kicked off a discussion of the timelines and the releases of Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, Minish Cap, Four Swords, which all came out in the preceding years, did not help to smooth things over. At this point, message boards and chat rooms all started springing up, arguing over what timeline was the true events of the Hyrule timeline. Maybe all the games have a hidden order, maybe all the games have different cultures recalling the same story over generations. Maybe it's just an anthology of similar events with similar characters designed to optimize revenue. Anyways, that all changed with the release of this little thing called the Hyrule Historia. To coincide with the release of Skyward Sword for Zelda's 25th anniversary, a book was released called the Hyrule Historia. See, the first third of the book is all about like art concepts for Skyward Sword that explained goals behind the art team's decisions and different directions that they could have gone. Like instead of the sailcloth, at one time, Fi would ride Link's shoulders and glide him down to safety. Cute. And at another point, she looked like this. So I think we got a win in this one. The second third of the book expands on the Zelda timeline, and this has been the official, mostly, timeline of the Zelda universe ever since. It details the events that start in Skyward Sword, and eventually a timeline split that occurs in Ocarina of Time, which continues in 3 separate timelines, ending in either Phantom Hourglass, now Spirit Track, Four Swords Adventure, or Zelda 2. Uninitiated, this is the 3 forks timeline that you'll see in most other people's videos if you look this up. You'll also probably hear the terms adult timeline, child timeline, and downfall timeline. If any of this is new to you, I'm going to do a quick rundown, so don't worry. The adult timeline is where the events of Ocarina of Time, Wind Waker, Phantom Hourglass, and Spirit Tracks happen. Because at the end of Ocarina of Time, Zelda, feeling bad for Link losing his childhood, sends adult Link back in time to be able to live out his childhood. The timeline where all the events of Ocarina of Time happened continues to happen just without Link, because Link that made those events happen went back in time. Then, later in that timeline, once the seal stopping Ganondorf from coming back broke, because there was no Link that was around in that timeline, Ganondorf was able to take over Hyrule, and as a result, the goddesses flooded Hyrule, and the events of Wind Waker happen, which directly leads to Phantom Hourglass, which leads to Spirit Tracks. And we'll get to it, but Spirit Tracks basically just takes place in a far-off land that isn't the original Hyrule. The child timeline is where Link, sent back as a child, armed with the knowledge of an adult and Ganondorf's evil plan, gathers the stones quickly and convinces the king that Ganondorf is bad. The king then stops him before any of the bad stuff that we see in Ocarina of Time happens. No lands fall into darkness. The kingdom is able to imprison Ganondorf before he actually does any overthrowing. So, with his chosen one role fulfilled, Link wanders through the woods and falls into Termina. Cue the events of Majora's Mask. Then he returns as the hero who saved 2 kingdoms without any of the glory. Eventually, he turns into this guy here, and according to to Hyrule Historia, he helps the new Link in Twilight Princess, and then Four Swords Adventure happens for some reason. The Downfall Timeline is where Ganon wins and takes over for a bit, and the rest of the games happen except for Skyward Sword, Minish Cap, and the Four Swords, which all take place well before Ocarina of Time. Everything made sense here for a while. Some of the games feel at least a little bit out of place, like Four Swords Adventure in the Child Timeline instead of right after Four Swords and Minish Cap, especially since they're all thematically linked, but this is good enough for the community. Then, along comes 2016, and Breath of the Wild releases. A lot of arguments start cropping up online about a merged timeline, and maybe this is in this timeline versus the adult versus the Downfall, or maybe it's a new timeline, who knows. Nintendo's official statement was, it doesn't really matter, but to the fans that have got a good 30 years of caring about this timeline under their belts, they refuse to let it go. And suddenly, without warning, Nintendo released an updated timeline in 2018 with the Creating a Champion book that switched around the order of a couple games like Link's Awakening and Oracle of Seasons and Oracle of Ages, which, okay. Sure. They also released this line. The timeline can be interpreted a number of ways and may change depending on new discoveries that have come to light and on the player's imagination. Okay, we can deal with it. It still mostly makes sense, even if the fandom is now divided between the old timeline and the new timeline. It's still mostly the same, and we're mostly on the same page. Except for then in 2023, Tears of the Kingdom releases, and honestly the story just feels like a big middle finger to the timeline theorists. Now Hyrule was founded by the Zonai, which are a tribe that we've never heard of before, except for in Breath of the Wild, but maybe they were just refounding Hyrule? Because that has happened before. Hyrule is a kingdom that goes through ups and downs. Speaking of, Hyrule Castle was just built over top of old Ganondorf, or maybe it's a new Ganondorf, so that it can firm up the seal on him or something? Yeah, sure. It's also around this time too where people started pointing out how Nintendo has historically, we'll say, axed any Legend of Zelda stuff that they themselves did not directly produce. And while the Hyrule Historia was commissioned by them, technically it was put out by Dark Horse Comics, which is cool, but there's a lot of dispute that has come up about if anything in them is actually canon, because pretty much everything in them is just interviews with the developers, and Nintendo just kind of makes things canon on a whim sometimes. So at this point, it's kind of hard to take anything from the book as gospel. So to avoid any more confusion, I'm going to try and stick as close to exactly what we see in the games as the only canon that exists. I know that there's other sources, and I'm open to letting them in maybe in the future, but we'll have to check that out as we go. And once again, the community is all over the place. Gone are the days of any agreements on timeline placement, and now we just get to fight over who's right while Nintendo cashes their checks. So here we are, back at square one, and lost in the void of only having bits and pieces of this story that spans 30 years IRL and quite possibly thousands of years in game. So, what can a single robot do? Let's fix the timeline. But we need to fix it differently than everyone else. Partly because I need to stand out as a young YouTuber. Feel free to subscribe if you want to support me. Thank you. But mostly because I think that everyone is kind of going about it the wrong way. See, we're building houses on shaky foundations at best, and I think we need to wipe the slate clean and start over. So let's fix it by playing through every game in the Zelda series in chronological release order, and try to put ourselves in the mindset of the developers as we go along to see if we can find anything that maybe other people are missing. I want to look at this like an archaeologist would. Do I know anything about archaeology? No, but I can Google. I'm going to start by playing through the original Legend of Zelda on my NES and see what we can glean from the game. From here, I'll be playing each game chronologically in order of release, taking notes on any possible clues that we find. For every game we play through, I'm going to be paying particularly close attention to the story, the map, the sociology, the technology, and the gameplay. Obviously, the story can give us hints about the timeline, but we need to go deeper than that. The map can show us a great deal about where the games take place, physically in the world of Hyrule, and that might help us extrapolate some puzzle pieces for where the game fits chronologically. That said, it's a given that there are going to be limitations on the map because of technology available at the time. Some parts may be stretched or shrunk, prioritizing gameplay over continuity. It is absolutely something Nintendo does very well. The same thing also goes for all the structures on the map. Those could shrink or grow over time. They could shrink because of erosion, they could grow because it's a building and people are expanding the building, or the town around the building. Sociology is how I'm going to classify the world's social structures. Are there factions? Are they speaking and working together? Is there strife and difference between them? Do people live in caves or castles? All that sort of thing. Technology is also a good indication of timeline, even if that technology is being rediscovered instead of just created. This also means things like armor, clothing, magical items, or sophisticated mechanisms. Now, just having played most of the games myself, I know off the top of my head there's multiple points where Hyrule has waxed and waned, and seeing ancient technology like the hookshot or robots in Skyward Sword won't make me put it at the end of the timeline. Rather, if we find evidence of someone building a hookshot or building these kinds of robots, that would be something that would indicate this is an older game in the timeline, and any games that have hookshots or robots like them would likely be placed after that first game. Gameplay might also have some indicators, as well as other things like movesets being more advanced might be showing in some way the development of martial arts or organized training, which isn't something that would happen at a point of downfall. But this is also a tricky one because there's a lot of games on this list that were very limited by the technology of their time. But I do want this category to also be able to fit in any other additional concepts that I might not be thinking of at the moment. And if you have any other ideas of things I should look for while I'm making this list, please drop it in the comments below. I'm more than open to suggestions. Anyway, that's the plan, and honestly, I have no idea where this is going to end up. But as far as I'm concerned, the timeline as we know it is almost completely dissolved by now. But I believe that there's an answer out there somewhere that can be very satisfying and can hold enough water to be able to incorporate future additions to the series, which is historically what has torn previous timelines presented apart. Don't forget to leave any suggestions for things to look out for through the playthroughs in the comments below. I'm also going to drop the first official video of the series, so if you do want to check it out, click here. Or if this sounds boring to you, that's okay. Check out some of my other videos. I'm not just a Zelda YouTuber, at least not yet. We'll see where this road goes. Anyways, I'm Heart and a Half, and if you've got at least half a heart, please leave a like. And as always, thank you so much for watching.